Now you'll have to bear with me. This topic that I'm talking about today comes from one of the units that I studied as part of my Masters. The unit was called Applied Imagination in the Anthropocene. So we were looking at the role of creativity and how that could help us into the future to come out of the Anthropocene. As a social ecologist, it was very interesting. I'm just going to follow on from Martin today. And I made a couple notes when he was speaking. He asked us to reevaluate, a reevaluation of human economy and ecology relations. And that economy is a social construct and that we have to change our assumptions. Well, in social ecology, this little diagram here is by one of our loved professors, Professor Stuart Hill. And so we do exactly that. And we're all about changing the foundation. So we take away economy. This is our triple bottom line. Economy is now in here with all our other social and cultural institutions. It doesn't have its own. So it takes its focus away from that to make room for other things that are important for our life that at the moment we're pretending really aren't that important and are not considered in a lot of decisions at the top level. Maybe at the bottom level they're starting to be, but at the top level. So that makes us room for us to put people back in and the personal. And social ecology is very big on bringing that people personal. On top of all of this, we also study the process of change. And we're very interested in the process of change because, as every single one of us knows, change is really hard and difficult and most of us don't like to do it. But that's where we need to be at, is that personal transformation. So we talk about transformation a lot more than we would talk about transition.
I just have to say something here. Has anyone seen that? There's a meme going around, there's things like, who wants change? And everyone's raised their hand.
Yes.
Who wants change?
No one. And that's exactly right. So, yes. I'll just go back to that's all right. I was trying to think how to put it back in together, but I don't think I can. So in this unit, we were it's quite an open study, so we can do what we're most interested in. And when I was a young adult, I used to really enjoy doing artwork and have not found any time for it in my life since. So I was very interested in this idea of art as research to begin with, because I'm quite a researcher. So you can see that quote there, when this creative practice is used for sustained inquiry by a conscious practitioner, it can lead to new ways of thinking and problem solving and increasing consistency between our internal and our external worlds. So that internal and external world is where the nature art therapy comes in. So a lot of you probably are familiar with art therapy, used it in a way to help people who've got mental issues or whatever else. I'm going to put it to you that if we're human in this world, we're all going to have mental issues, if we refer back to that first slide from Joanna Macy, because there is a lot for us to be thinking about and to have grief about and be feeling overwhelmed, disempowered and knowing what to do. So nature art therapy, we're using nature as the therapist and the creative medium. And so we can develop a transformative relationship, and it's about trying to deal. We're always, the social ecologists, forever trying to heal that divide between human and nature. And so that people can see themselves as nature, because of course we are. And that refers also not just what people's idea of nature as in trees and plants, but as in our human nature and what it means to be a human being. Oh, I moved the clicker. Sorry. All right, now I'm just going to come back to my notes a little bit and figure out where I'm at. I don't want to bore you too much with a lot of the... So in my research and practice, I work outside societal norms, helping to bridge that gap between the humans and nature, and by participating in what's called the Great Turning, which was Joanna Macy at the beginning is a deep ecologist who talks a lot about the Great Turning. So the birthing of an ecocentric world paradigm where it's all about relationships. So it's a difficult space to occupy, imagining and performing healthier, sustainable lifestyles. You're by far not the norm, and there's a lot of pressure from outside to behave in a different way, and people wonder if you're crazy and if you really like hard work and a whole lot of other things. So finding support to continue doing this work is essential for my well-being and for others, as is learning the best way I can be of service to others and understand the issues at hand. Because that's the thing, we've got to get to those assumptions. What are those assumptions that are there that we're not talking about? There's white elephants in the room all the time. So by taking on a project to develop an art piece, I took on a new materialist approach, which I'll talk about a little bit. There was a whole lot of different other units that I did with my masters, and the one before this was cultural interface, learning two ways, where I dealt a lot with rethinking the way we think of Indigenous issues and whatnot. So this quote here from Bruce Pascoe, who's author of Dark Emu Eggs, which is a great book, asking us to rethink the way, the history of Indigenous Australia, and especially pre-colonisation lifestyles and agriculture, and seeing, you know, Aboriginal people as agriculture partners with nature, harvesting perennial grains and tubers, not hunter-gatherers. So in the local Noongar culture, the past is always present. Time is cyclic, not linear and causal, and you'll see that in this my presentation, things don't flow in a line. They sort of go around in circles a little bit, and that can also be a difficult thing to deal with. But how does that affect me, this idea that time is cyclic? David Abram is a phenomenologist, and he talks about oral culture, an Indigenous voice being something that is always present to some extent participant with the encompassing discourse of an animate earth. So it connects us more to being in the present and with the earth at the time. So by telling mythical creation stories, Indigenous people participate in a creative process, an ongoing emergence and a periodic renewal. Colonisation brought in introduced stock. They went straight for those delicious, tasty Indigenous food crops and pretty much wiped them out. And Aboriginal people were denied access to their land, and the Australian environment changed. So their opportunity to participate and to renew their knowledge by being on land and the agricultural practices was impacted. So now, of course, we have monocultures dominating the Noongar lands mainly, and gone are the native foods and most of the people. In its place, we have machines and industrialised agriculture, salinity, loss of biodiversity and culture. What could it be in the future? What is the future of food systems in Noongar country? So that was my loosely held inquiry. So I had two purposes of doing this artwork. I don't want to go into new materialism too much, just to say that the way I see it is learning to be affected by things other than human. So Rosie Bay-Dottie's a great speaker on new materialism, and you can have a look. She's got lots of stuff on YouTube. It can get really heady and very academic, so I just won't go there too much. An example of new materialism is the Diverse Economies project. It's something that I've recently encountered in my research, and I struggled to understand it, I could read it and intellectually understand it, but to make it part of my life and then speak of it to others, I was really struggling with it. So it was started by two women, J.K. Gibson Graham, they call themselves, and this was their book that was released for the public, Take Back the Economy. And it's about bringing new worlds into being. It holds multiple positions that are an alternative to capitalism while deconstructing capitalism and being in a field of multiple potentials open to experimentation. So people become agents of economic change and released from their capitalist identity and allegiance. It's about taking an exploratory stance and not judging, with the intention of learning and letting surprise and enchantment become impossible. There's performative social experiments and creative research. It leads to the co-creation of knowledge from what they're doing, and through the process, changing ourselves, changing our thinking, changing the world. So you can see why that appealed to me, because I like that whole personal transformation idea. So, is anyone familiar with this? Seen this before? So this is from Joanna Macy's work, the despair and hope. This is the spiral of the great turning, which she talks about. So it starts with gratitude. This is a way for us to deal with all the bad that is happening in the world, and a way to accept and deal with grief in a way. You know, if we're not feeling grief, we're not human. So it starts with gratitude, honouring our pain, seeing with new eyes, and going forth. So if you can imagine it as a spiral, and so then you come back, you go forth, and you try something new, do something else, come to the gratitude. And the honouring our pain bit is, you know, feeling the grief. It's not a nice place to be, and I can tell you, while I was doing this assignment, there were many times where I struggled to hold on to not being too depressed. I won't go into this too much detail. This is just, each one of these different colours is one of those cycles in that spiral going up and up. And this is what happened for me while I was doing this artwork. So I've got 4 different sections: the Kimberleys, New Materialism, Transition Town Sterlings, and Diverse Economies. That was sort of the process. Now it looks very neat, we're going from one to the other, but as I was saying, time is cyclic, so these weren't all happening separate from each other. Okay, so had to be in nature. Let nature speak to me. What my project would be, what would my artwork be. So I went to, I'm lucky enough that the Hale School has retained some vegetation and there's a nice bush block, easy walking from me, so I went there. And I had in the past loved leaves and stenciling and the different shapes of leaves. So I collected a whole lot of material, leaves and balga and resin, and really didn't have much idea of what I was doing at the time. But I felt gratitude for the diversity of the plant and the form and the colour that was in working distance. So when I came home, I started, you can see I had everything out. And I actually used a mortar and pestle, which I thought was great. We're talking food, got stuff out of the kitchen, and made my own paints. I'm going to read a couple. There's a little bit of comment, and then I'll let you know from my journal article, because journaling was a big part of this, to work out what I was going through. So I left the Kimberleys 4 years ago, and my life as an organic farmer. The leaving wasn't entirely of my choosing, and there are many emotions mixed up in my thoughts of the Kimberley. So from my journal, I can't shift the feeling of sorrow today. I woke up sad about not being able to walk out my door onto the land. The red soil was calling me, and the open spaces where the wonder of nature infuses your soul and blows through your mind. The call of the adventure, I miss it today. So as I was doing my artwork, I was putting it on the wall, so I was immersed in it all the time. In my bedroom, and then I moved it out of my bedroom because I couldn't take it there anymore. So it went into my study. Recently I added a photo of the Kimberley at dusk with a full moon to the wall, which I'm sorry is not on there. Almost straight away I felt calmer and I found myself joyful on entering the room. Beforehand I had a feeling of something not right, too much sun to work there, blinding me too much. Confusion with keeping in mind my initial focus. It became clear to me that the journey of personal awareness and letting go of what is known or believed, I couldn't, if I tried, get rid of my connection to that country. It sings through me and lifts my spirit. It took me so long to get used to the openness of the Kimberleys, and now it is a part of me, that open vista of possibilities and nature mostly untouched by capitalism. So I was able to separate my feelings from for the Kimberley, because I had a lot of bad feelings as well from the Kimberleys, from my past events. And it's okay that I don't feel this love for the Noongar country that I'm in at the moment, because I'm only a newcomer to it, and it's still working its way through me. I'm still building that relationship. And so during this time I organised my first trip back to the Kimberleys, because I hadn't been back. So this helped me heal in a way. And the red of the Kimberley soil has come through in the resin of the balga and seeped into my art, giving me comfort. It frames the window of my art, which this is a window you'll see in my final piece later. which is an invitation to imagine the possible. Okay. These little jars, I blitzed the leaves. You'll work it out. So, actually, there's a lot here. Am I okay for time if I keep going?
I just saw someone pass from a panel on next grad.
Okay. So moving on to the new materialism. The imagined natural progression of an industrial world, for me, is the apocalypse. And it scares me, and I try to suppress it. This is what all our movies and everything are showing us, dystopia and all the rest of it, and whatever happens. And I try to suppress it. However, it appeared on the page. It was there when I was played around with dirt and charcoal, so there was no getting away from it. So from my journal, since putting my art on the wall, I keep returning to images of the apocalypse, as if such a thing is ordained, an event that will happen, has happened, and will happen again. Dusty, swirly, blurry, smoky nothingness. More than that, absence, loss, despair, an event that was sudden and lasting, changing everything, changing matter and what matters, more than a lifetime. So obviously it's something that causes me pain, dread and no mental room to move. Acknowledging this was difficult, and it seeps into my life and it disables my drive to keep going. But how can I deal with it? So from my journal, I've been playing around with the idea of having a dark section separating the view around the window, native from industrialised agriculture. It came to me to represent the Nyetting, which is the dark time, the time before time, the Noongar culture, when spirits walked the land, and the apocalypse, an imagined future in the present war of words and nuclear testing. This is when North Korea, America and Australia were all talking around. Stark places, but not empty, places of energy and possibility, new beginnings and endings, chaos and order. The Nyetting was when things were ordered. The Woggle shaped the land, swirled dirt, malleable land pushed around, smudged on the page. The apocalypse disturbs order, wipes it clean. Charcoal from the burnt balga. Charcoal, the purifier of water and air, both imagined. So there was comfort in this seeing with new eyes, the apocalypse and the Nyetting events on the same continuum, when life is in spirit form rather than a material form. Perhaps a continuum of spirit? And thus Noongar people see themselves connected to their spirit ancestors in a continuation of the cycle of birth, life, death and spirit. It was then that I understood the continuum of materiality described in New Materialism. So, I'll move on. Where's transition? Oh, no. Sorry, people. So in order to create storable and plentiful plant, I happily experimented with my knowledge of plant DNA extraction, which as a botanist at UWA we were doing in the 90s. Wonderful thing, you end up with a little bit in the bottom of a tube, bright colour that's come from the leaves. And I thought, yeah, that's the idea. But it also aroused memories of group participation, because those labs that went for 4 hours every Friday afternoon when everyone else was in the pub, we were a camaraderie, we weren't out there having fun, we were in there extracting DNA from leaves. So I became aware of my present circumstances, isolated from a group, a tribe in my material world, part of a society that is becoming more disconnected and impacted by capitalism. Where is that? Sorry, I can't see them there. So there's something about the process of making the paints that's getting at me. It seems such a disruptive process, making it in a NutriBullet, straining it through my almond milk strainer, then settling and removing the water, as if people complicate things. The settling and extracting the essence, how water has to be added first and then extracted. I'm leaning to using the mortar and pestle, yet it does take more effort and for me to pound and smash and then smooth with water. But it doesn't take electricity. There is no plastic. I almost feel more connected to it. It's taken more out of me. The other technique makes me feel removed from the effort. I've been thinking about finding the essence of a person, and does it need to be diluted by what? Societal norms, values and beliefs? Blitzed in a confusing spin before it can settle, condense, purify itself? Is the process somehow necessary? While this is going on, I wonder about my tendencies to be such a purist. I only want to use materials found in nature or recyclables. Why? I want to make a statement. Then I'm conscious of overthinking. Is this creativity or cleverness? Who am I being of service to? Myself? So I was struggling to hold contradictions and drop habits, because that's part of the whole thing, is not living in polarity. You can have a whole lot of different things happening at the same time. And the story of time, not enough of it, kept playing over and over in my mind. So I want to use paintbrushes and pens if I feel the need. I don't want to constrict myself. Got me thinking that in the Anthropocene, that's exactly what we need to do. Technology is there, and not all of it's bad. Some of it creates unbalanced disharmony in the world, and some doesn't. Perhaps that is a good question to ask ourselves. Does this bring harmony? Perhaps we need to use everything at our disposal. So many thoughts, one ramble onto another. Where's the clarity? I feel like my paint diluted and divided into millions of pieces. I feel like I'm in that jar, settling. Perhaps being in the blender is like living in modern society. It keeps you cloudy and mixed with ideas and concepts that don't belong to you, in a state of agitation and not knowing. Once away from the machine technology, we can settle and find our essence, separated and unique from others. There is always something, however, left in that communal water, some part of us in society that can't be separated out. So it gave me the opportunity to see how I get hooked into the story of not enough time and a symptom of capitalism. And by the end of this period, I had started to buy food bulk, moving away from supermarkets, and I attended my first meeting with the Transition Town Stirling group. Okay. The last part was about diverse economies, and just reconsidering Bruce Pascoe again, and you can imagine that there was a lot of sadness in really considering that that's the way history was and what's happened, and the lost opportunities that we've had for an agriculture system that can be truly sustainable and regenerating our land. Yeah. I don't know that I want to read all of it to you. It would take a bit of time. But you know, it's a timely issue, a historic moment, a re-evaluation of our history that needs to be brought into the world. How does it affect me? Deeply. I'm moved on telling my daughters about the book, Bruce Pascoe's. They are resistant to hear it. We've learned about how we took things away, made it hard, and guilt seems to fill the air. No, I say, I don't want you to feel guilty. You didn't do it. It's okay to feel sad and acknowledge it happened. I want to share the joy and amazement I feel over such a wonderful Indigenous history. So that's the first stage of the gratitude, obviously. And I start to look at the paths and the road and building up my artwork. At this stage, I still haven't started on my final piece, and I'm just producing lots of pieces everywhere. And so there's a bit here about wheat. And I've got it in my head that wheat has to be uniform and straight, even strokes from my old toothbrush. But even growing as a monocrop, it differs, and the wind creates microcurrents, swirling it in different directions. So I use a brush to soften it. It can still be a thing of beauty. It's not the wheat's fault that settlers cleared the bush, getting rid of perennial crops harvested for centuries. It's not the wheat's fault that knowledge of plants and how to manage country has been lost, that farmers use chemicals, or even that it's an annual. So there's colour all over the page. I'm stuck by how structured it seems, and yet I feel confused and blown out. The more I focus on the work, the more connections I see and meaning I bring in, and I'm not sure if I'm making things easier for myself. This is a little strange one for me. There's this feeling of guilt about my determination to see organics proliferate. What about Indigenous food? Now I can see it doesn't have to be one or the other. I can celebrate both as being part of a diverse economy. So the art therapy has helped me to understand the diverse economies. I can recognise I was still attached to capitalism, defining things in relation to it as an alternative, which is really playing into dualism, one way or the other. It has left me cloudy and shaky. I just got it today, and how it changes everything, changes the way research is done and why it is done, and it's what I've been wanting and perhaps a little scared of, because with that comes responsibility. I'm worried that I'm not up to the task of explaining myself and that I'll give the wrong impression, leave people feeling confused. Okay, which is still there to some extent. At this point, I take the final step of engaging with my new tribe of the Transition Town movement, and I take my art to the public, where I completed it. So this is, while I'm there, these are actually bread tags, so it's a nice little bit of symbolism about things that are thrown out and one use and whatever else. And so I'm doing it as I'm there and having conversations with people. So I'm nervous and unsure. So how do I talk about it to people? What is my purpose of taking it to the world? My supervisor suggests this was an important part of the process, and it was wonderful. Working on the piece in public was a great way to engage people in conversations about nature, industrialised agriculture, and reimagining Aboriginal agriculture and possibilities. So by being mindful of the work that reconnects and the agency of materials, I have activated therapeutic, creative energy without a traditional therapist. Working in and with nature, I felt supported and guided. The process of producing the art and the act of showing it allowed me to translate messages into personal and collective lessons and increase my knowledge and capacity. I've created an art piece that helps me order my thoughts and remind me of connections. By being clearer with my language and messages, it's left me feeling more confident. So I hope to use it in the future. Now, I haven't stopped. This is my final art piece. And I'm not an artist, but you can see it was more about the process. This part here obviously is the monoculture, the industrialised agriculture with our straight bitumen roads and the apocalypse. And this part here is the perennial indigenous foods with the Aboriginal biddies, the pass. And up the top we have, I can't remember her name. It's the lady who, Jindalee. So Jindalee, who formed the Milky Way, she collected the children and put this in her hair, and that formed the Milky Way, which is a story for the local Noongar culture. So she's up there in the netting, and yeah, the possibility in the centre from what we have at the moment, which is our industrialised agriculture. I haven't looked where in the future, just that personal is an important part of our life, and it is recognised. That economics has taken a back burner, and we can concentrate now on creativity and finding new ways of living and exploring our relationship with the other than human and materials in our world.